Following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The Queen remains comfortable and at Balmoral.
By mid-afternoon, all we really know is that Prince Charles and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, are already at Balmoral, we assume, at their mother's side. We don't really know who else is travelling or exactly when. It's only later that day that we find out that Harry didn't fly with the rest of his family.
A second call is made by Charles to his son, at which he suggests, maybe that's not strong enough, tells Harry that his wife is not to come, just him alone. Again, we have to refer to Harry's book. There's been no official confirmation of this.
According to Spare, Prince Harry's controversial autobiography,
I was welcome at Balmoral, but he didn't want her. He started to lay out his reason, which was nonsensical and disrespectful, and I wasn't having it. Don't ever speak about my wife that way, he stammered, apologetic, saying he simply didn't want a lot of people around.
Harry, we think, protests about this, and Charles says, well, Kate's not going. We don't want to make it too much of a big fuss.
I suspect, hurdles were put in his way. I think there were discussions about Meghan Markle and, whether she should be involved.
There are no imminent commercial flights to Aberdeen.
There seems to be no offer to get him on this royal flight that's going up from RAF Northolt, so Harry has to make his own arrangements and he books a private jet out of Luton Airport.
For citizens across the UK, the reality dawns that the country hasn't faced a crisis like the death of a monarch in 70 years. Only those in their late 70s and older would remember what happened and how to act.
The death of the king, that was a shock in 1952.
Now we know that very sadly he died from cancer. At the time, though, that wasn't even referred to.
People hadn't been told what was really going on. Not only did the public not know about the cancer, most of his family didn't either.
He hadn't been on the throne very long. He'd come to the throne because his brother had abandoned it in 1936. He had been a reluctant king, if you like, and quite possibly being king had cut short his life. And certainly that was the view of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
He had been pictured at the airport the previous week before his death, waving off his daughter, Elizabeth, and her husband to step into his shoes and go on the tour for him.
They knew her father was ill, but they had an expectation that he had 10 more years, and that they had 10 years before the responsibilities of monarchy were going to descend on her young shoulders.
But that was the image. I mean, quite now, of course, quite a poignant one, him waving off his daughter, Elizabeth, Princess at that point, was in Kenya when the news broke of her father's death, and reports describe how Prince Philip broke the news to her.
She was going to have to abandon everything she had set her young heart and dreams on, raising Charles and Anne, they're the only two children they had at that time, being an officer's wife. That was all going to come crashing down and come to an end.
All of us here know that we are present at the making of history.
I've always felt that for her, as Queen, the one thing that mattered to her more than anything was that as far as her father, King George VI, was concerned, that she would have done a good job. I am convinced that her father would have been desperately proud of what she'd done.
At Balmoral Castle in Scotland, the Queen's health takes a drastic turn.
I think we all know lots of elderly people hang on for a significant anniversary or date or Christmas or New Year and then let go. And the Queen had that date of appointing a new Prime Minister in her diary for 2 months. And I'm convinced that she hung on for that date because it was so quick after she had done her duty, her final duty.
Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II dies. Prince Charles and Princess Anne are at their mother's bedside. Princes William, Andrew and Edward and his wife Sophie are in the air, 51,000 feet above northern England. Prince Harry is at Frogmore Cottage, Windsor.
We now know that Her Majesty died at 3:10 in the afternoon. We're simply being told Her Majesty is receiving medical attention, and this goes on for some hours. And it's extraordinary the way in which this huge news was handled.
1 cue coming to 4.
I was told to be ready for a significant announcement from about 3 o'clock. And that's all that would be said to me over the airwaves because, you know, they're not entirely secure. But we knew that obviously we were never going to go down that route, announcing Her Majesty's passing, until we had the official announcement.
Good afternoon. We are interrupting programmes to bring you the latest on the health of the Queen. A statement released earlier today said that doctors had become concerned for her health and that she had been placed under medical supervision.
So you're broadcasting very solemnly, and yet, as far as everybody knew, Her Majesty the Queen was still alive. It was very, very strange. It was very eerie. The rest of the public were simply waiting to find out.
We had the television on. We were all kind of glued to what was happening at this point, and there was now sort of ruling news.
But yes, it is, I think, alarming and concerning that they have decided to tell us today that they are particularly concerned about her medical condition. As you will probably not be surprised to hear, we don't know what that involves.
There was a real feeling of kind of a subdued tone.
That is fairly common for members of the royal family not to tell us more details than they have to.
The royal flight arrives at Aberdeen. Even the BBC presenting team are uncertain which members of the family are on board.
Duke of Cambridge.
Yes, that's Duke of Cambridge just emerged from the aircraft.
Countess of Wessex, I suspect.
And we think the Countess of Wessex.
Of Wessex. Gosh.
That looks like the Duke of York, I think, doesn't it?
Yes.
I think we saw the Earl of Wessex as well.
Yeah, we did. Yes. Who was that?
Prime Minister Liz Truss is informed that London Bridge is down. The Queen has died. At Downing Street, her team set to work writing her tribute speech. They sit on the floor, as Boris Johnson's furniture is yet to be replaced.
There was a delay in announcing the death of the Queen, and that's because there's a sort of cascade list of people who need to know and who takes priority.
The palace prepared a very clear communications plan. The first person who the private secretary would inform would be the late Queen's Prime Minister. And the process of informing the Prime Ministers and the Governors General of other realms was a part of that.
It's not just one Prime Minister who needs to know, it's 15 Prime Ministers. The Queen was Queen of 15 countries. They are the Commonwealth realms. In some of those countries, it was the middle of the night, but those Prime Ministers had to be informed. So that accounts for some of the delay.
The guidance we'd given had always said, don't look at any speculation on social media, because there have been many occasions over the years when people have phoned me up to say, do you know the Queen's dying, or do you know the Duke of Edinburgh is dying, which always ended up being false alarms. So it was very much wait for the official announcement and then begin to act.
You have to wait for that official confirmation from the palace, and until you get that, you say nothing, even though you know you are potentially seconds away from perhaps the biggest story you will ever cover in your entire life. Good evening. We come on air tonight with uncertainty and concern, and that's why the programme might feel a little different this evening. It was announced at lunchtime today that Her Majesty the Queen is under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle. This is after doctors became concerned for her health.
Via social media, a Sussex insider confirms that Meghan is not travelling with Harry. BBC Royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell offers a candid speculation about Meghan's whereabouts.
What do we make of that, Nick?
Yes, what do we make of that? Well, I guess that they have concluded that this really isn't a moment for Meghan to be there with the other close members of the family, with the Queen, so she has stayed at Windsor.
Princes William, Andrew, Edward and his wife Sophie arrive at Balmoral. They know they are too late.
You want to be there to say goodbye if you really can. You know, my own experience for people who miss the death of a loved one, it's something which can prey on your mind for a very long time.
For my own mother, I was just 30 minutes too late, and I know from first-hand experience just how absolutely awful it is to get there knowing that you were just that little bit too late. Huge sympathy for them that they missed her passing.
Prince Harry's private rented jet takes off from Luton Airport. He still doesn't know his grandmother has died.
There was a lot of attention that day on how various members of the royal family got to Balmoral and who was there at what time.
While the public and media await further updates.
Then there was going to be an announcement at 6, but nothing. And then people thought, well, actually, are they waiting until Harry arrives? Well, surely they wouldn't release any statement that the Queen had died before Harry had arrived.
The editor that day came through on talkback in my ear and told me that he'd had confirmation that the Queen had actually died, but the palace weren't ready to release the statement yet, but it was coming. But that's the moment when the rubber hits the road. You are going to have to say those words which the audience know are coming but are still dreading.
We're just looking at the gates of Balmoral once again. These are live pictures. We heard that news a little bit earlier on today that doctors are concerned about her health.
I was told the significant announcement is going to come up on autocue. Just read it. I think we go to pictures of Her Majesty the Queen. So I knew there was an opportunity as well to change my tie, put a black tie on. So I had all that in my mind and they just said, right, go with it. Go with the statement.
And then it was just before 6:30 that the news spread out to where I was waiting that announcement was going to be made.
This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
And it's a very solemn, somber moment. We've all been rehearsing for it. We knew it would come, but when it actually comes, I think you can see, you know, he delivers it very coolly and calmly, but it's a big moment and a very sad moment.
I remember the range of emotions in the newsroom, and I was, you know, these are seasoned journalists. There was gulps of, oh my God, there was, and then silence for a second, and then I remember a few people started crying.
I burst into tears and I was not expecting that reaction. I felt in that moment just the enormity of what her passing would signify, and I think I just felt this, like, what's going to come next.
I remember being sat in the studio, red light on the camera, and we were on air at the time, and I saw a notification on my phone that said there was a statement from the palace. And I knew that was the moment. And then the editor that day said, the news has been confirmed, you can announce it now. I know that people are joining us all the time, and I know that this news is particularly significant. The sad news of the death of Her Majesty the Queen, confirmed by Buckingham Palace in the last few moments, that the Queen has died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. My feeling is always that I'm a human. You know, this is hard for me to say as it is for you to listen to it. So be normal about it. But how do I tell you in the kindest way possible? How do you tell a family member that someone that you both love has died? Because that's how significant the Queen was in all of our lives.
I knew to be ready. So I looked at it and I thought, this is very important. You've been doing this for nearly 40 years, don't mess it up. So look into the camera and read out loud, how hard can that be? Well, as it turned out, the rain or something had got into the autocue, it froze.
We have some very important news. Buckingham Palace has just announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old. Queen died.
So in my head, I paused, and I've seen it on the tape. I just paused, but as you naturally would, and I thought in my head, it's either the place or the time. Fill in the blanks.
Queen died just a few moments ago, the announcements at Balmoral. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history.
There was a bit of a crowd around us of tourists and onlookers, and there was an audible gasp when I made the announcement.
Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died.
And it just kind of hit me all the more that this was, an emotional event as much as it was historical and political. People were feeling it, there and in their guts. Exactly a week before, 1st of September, we just said goodbye to my mother. It had been her funeral, and I read the eulogy there, and I just felt, for a moment, I just thought, oh my goodness me, this is kind of, the mother of the nation. How must everyone be feeling? But then then your professionalism kicks in. So you read the statement, we play the national anthem, and you read it again. It doesn't need any more analysis. A very much loved and very old woman has passed away.
While the news sinks in, officials are busy putting their plans into action.
I remember hearing the news and pausing for a moment and thinking, oh, help, I'm not quite sure I'm ready for this yet, despite all those years of planning.
News of the Queen's death has just been announced. All government and civic buildings have 10 minutes to lower their flags to half-mast.
Imagery is really powerful, isn't it? And I think for many of us, when you actually see those pictures, even though you know it's going to happen, but you see those pictures of the flag being lowered and you understand exactly what that means, that's when it really hits home. That's when you know she's gone. And I know that people are joining us all the time, and I know that this news is particularly significant. The reign of Elizabeth II now comes to an end. Her eldest son, Charles, is officially now king.
A sense of urgency grips the nation, coupled with a desire to know more details that stretches way beyond British borders.
I had had so many phone calls and emails, people from around the world, can we talk to you, can we talk to you, news agencies, just so many, I couldn't process it on them. My phone kept ringing.
They want information, not salacious information, but just information. Who's going where? When's the funeral? How's it going to happen? What happened up to that point? Where's Harry? Where's Meghan?
I was probably getting 60, 70 calls a day, from places that you hadn't even heard of in the world, a huge number. But I remember that evening just completely buzzing and feeling disorientated by just the sense of history.
The news of the Queen's death echoes around the world.
Stay with us, we have got some breaking news.
The Queen has passed away. The Queen died peacefully, the royal family says, at Balmoral this afternoon.
Her Majesty died at her home in the Scottish Highlands, aged 96.
La reine Elisabeth II est morte à l'âge de 96 ans, dont 70 ans de règne.
A mezz'asta è morta la regina Elisabetta II.
Königin Elisabeth II ist tot.
There was something really quite moving about it. This was a moment that was being shared around the world.
The Queen was such a dominant factor on the world stage, and yet she did it by just being there.
I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. The thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
It was clear to everybody from those international tributes that she actually was a great and remarkable person.
Minutes before our own Prime Minister makes a statement, world leaders rush to pay tribute.
In the immediate aftermath of the death of the Queen, there's that moment where various world leaders who she meant a lot to are then paying their tributes. I remember the Canadian Prime Minister was one of the first.
I'm having trouble believing that my last sit-down with her was my last.
To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. To us all, she would be with us forever.
On occasions like that, the ability to find the right words at the right time, which really hit home, but also capture everything about the occasion, is so difficult to do.
President Macron was very impressive in what he said. Britain and France had a difficult relationship, not least in the years since Brexit. He spoke movingly.
And yet, to me, the most powerful of all the messages that came were those we saw from people on the streets, from youngsters who just happened to pass, who were probably grasping for the first time with the death of someone they knew. Yes, I know she wasn't related, but she was in most people's families.
Queen has passed away.
Oh my God, no! You've got to be joking.
It'll be a sad loss. She's been amazing.
We are tourists, and we didn't expect to hear the news while we were here in front of the Buckingham Palace.
Buckingham Palace has been one of those locations where people just flock to. People were just coming together, and some of them were standing in silence, some of them were sharing memories and sharing stories. That is an indication of what the Queen had done her entire life. At the very heart of what she wanted to do was bring the nation together. She did it in her life, and she also did it in her death.
One other thing that really got to me was within 10, 15 minutes of the announcement of Her Majesty's passing, a big crowd had gathered by then, and they started singing the national anthem. The words came floating across to me, God save the King.
God save the King.
It just sounded so strange. Yes, she's gone, and that's when it really hit home.
God save the King.
I always thought, actually, it was going to be a bigger psychological moment, collective moment than people realised. She had been Queen. She had been there on the money, on the stamps, on Christmas Day. She had been there all of our lives. And then she's gone.
TV channels are now broadcasting obituaries, paying respects to the Queen and giving focus to a nation's grief. These have been prepared months, sometimes years in advance.
There is a tradition, of course, in all media organisations that when a significant public figure is no longer with us, then we push out a lot of material that has been worked on for many months and years in some cases, particularly in the Queen's, because she was such a great age.
And so the reign of Elizabeth II comes to a close after 70 years at the age of 96. Since her coronation in 1953, the young woman who became our Queen at just 25 years of age set the standard by which future monarchs will be judged.
I found an obituary in our files of the Queen written in 1964.
She successfully reinvented the post-imperial era as the Commonwealth.
So it gives you an indication of how far back planning had begun. I'd been updating aspects of the Queen's obituary, I think from the first time she went to hospital since about 2013. So over the years, every year or so, we'd looked at it again, and it always needs freshening up.
The second Elizabethan age saw remarkable change, but she didn't change, not much.
Prince Harry's private jet is nearing Aberdeen. Later, he makes an astonishing claim about how he discovered the news of his grandmother's death.
I spent much of the flight staring at the clouds. As the plane began its descent, I checked the BBC website. Granny was gone.
I often think it must be truly heartbreaking for Prince Harry, who was very, very close to his grandmother. I feel he's probably still devastated that he wasn't there for that moment.
Across the UK, London Bridge, the plan for the Queen's death is underway.
An incredible amount of work has been meticulously planned behind the scenes for many, many years. So there's a whole group of people, from civil servants to people who work in councils and district authorities, the police, probably even sections of the military. For them, it's actually, right, this is not a time for you to grieve or mourn. You have to literally get it together.
What we saw when the Queen died was all the most unbelievably highly ready organisations sprung into action.
London Bridge begins with D-Day, and then every day after that is D+1, D+2, D+, and the funeral is on D+10 for the King or the Queen.
And then came that question about when is D+1? This is Thursday, is tomorrow going to be D+1? So that was the point at which, for the rest of that evening, vast numbers of calls and emails coming in saying, when does the clock start ticking? As it was, it turned out the Privy Council met on the Saturday, and therefore our proclamation ceremonies as local authorities happened on the Sunday, which was quite a relief because it gave us that little bit of extra breathing space to get plans in place.
So let's get a reminder of the statements that we've had in the past hour. First, this from the royal household. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother.
Prime Minister Liz Truss makes a statement outside 10 Downing Street.
The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built.
There's something quite brutal about succession. The monarch inherits the throne, becomes king immediately on the last breath of the previous monarch.
The new monarch will be known as King Charles III.
I had to check myself every single time when I referred to then the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. He didn't need a coronation or any of the many processes that took place in the next week. He was king, instantly.
Almost 5 hours after the Queen died, Prince Harry arrives at Balmoral. He is greeted by Princess Anne, who invites him to pay his last respects.
The room was dimly lit. I moved ahead uncertainly, and there she was. I stood, frozen. I stared and stared. I whispered to her that I hoped she was happy, that I hoped she was with Grandpa.
But I remember that evening I was absolutely exhausted, but absolutely wired. We've now got a king. This morning we were in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. People who are Queen's Counsel will be King's Counsel. Just all these small things, you start to reflect on the layers and layers of layers. I remember finally it being a wrap and just looking around the studio, and I was crying and everybody else. And I think it was a combination of that adrenaline. It was just incredibly moving.
This is a significant moment in the life of our country.
That is the fabric that holds us all together, and you know that there's always a Prime Minister in number 10, and you know that the Queen is always sitting on the throne. And if you said to anybody before that week that that's going to change and this is going to change in the space of a few days, people wouldn't believe you. But it happened, and we all had to live through it.
So ends the 8th of September 2022. Thousands arrive at Buckingham Palace The media machine is in overdrive.
The passing of a second Elizabethan age. Let's reflect on that.
A family mourns a dearly loved matriarch, and a world comes to terms with the death of the Queen. Friday, the 9th of September. The official period of mourning begins.
And this is the oldest cliche in the news journalist book, but it was absolutely true during that week. Those 10 days was a front row seat at the making of history.
The Queen had a say in every aspect of the 10 days that follow.
In the sunlit still of an Aberdeenshire morning, the Queen left her beloved Balmoral for the last time.
There had been some question about what sort of aeroplane would be used to bring her coffin back. Then it was suggested that a certain plane wasn't good enough. It had been used to transport troops to and from Afghanistan. And the Queen made the observation, well, if it's good enough for my boys, then it's certainly good enough for me.
As her coffin came through the dark streets of London and with rain pouring, you saw in the distance this sort of glowing vehicle moving. And it was clearly another piece of choreography from the Queen. You have to be seen to be believed. That's true in death as it is in life. I mean, the planning of that, it was beautiful.
After 5 days lying in state, on Monday the 19th of September, the Queen's coffin is brought to Westminster Abbey.
She was the first monarch to have their coronation televised. She was the first monarch to have their funeral televised, and it is the biggest funeral, the biggest event any of us will ever see.
There was that sense, particularly during the funeral and the gathering of world leaders and dignitaries, just how important Her Majesty was.
Monarchy is all about symbolism, all the way through the processions, the funeral service, the return to Windsor, the service at St George's Chapel.
We knew that interred below the very slabs of granite waiting for the Queen was the late Duke of Edinburgh. And there was a sort of reunion taking place between the two.
I do feel that the death of Her Majesty the Queen has left a hole in a lot of lives, and it's also a world that feels very different and a little strange without her.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
I think she was a unique figure in world history. I think it's unlikely that any monarch will be monarch for 70 years again.
For a modern monarch, she managed to maintain the sort of mystique of monarchy, this kind of medieval charisma. We didn't know a lot about her, but she seemed somehow quite accessible.
Her greatest achievement is that she left the royal family more popular than when she became Queen, which is astonishing, really.
Actually, that was her job. And the fact that she did it till the day that she dies, that's pretty impressive.
She had a life all about duty, and it was all about service. And I think that is why she will continue to be missed and loved by millions.